Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 510. This program is dedicated in honor and in merit of Yosef Shlema ben Risha for a speedy and complete refuah Shlema in the form of Leichatchil Le'osim Alecha, the ultimate healing as if it never happened in the first place, and we should only hear good news. So we're now in the latter days of the month of Av, preparing to go into the month of El. Next Shabbos will be Shabbos Mevarchim El. Yeah, the El, the Chedesh HaCheshbon, where we do an accounting of all the events that happened this past year, and Chedesh HaChana, prepare for the new year. So it's an interesting period because Av, on the other hand, is really the saddest month in the Jewish calendar. So how do we look at this whole period in time and how it relates to us? We're going to be talking about that. But I think we should begin with the most timely thing of all. Unfortunately, the war in Eretz Yisrael, the war in Israel does not end. Will the war in Israel ever end? Question that's coming in, especially today, after the latest escalation, where Israel has to preempt the imminent Rahman al-Islam attacks from Hezbollah, Northern Israel, from Lebanon. Israel preemptively struck them. Hopefully that served as somewhat of a deterrent. Rockets were shot. We don't have all the details. Now they're claiming that both sides are de-escalating. But the bottom line is, we're not out of the woods. We're dealing with enemies surrounding us from the south, Hamas, from the north, Hezbollah, from the east, Iran, all these are proxies of theirs, and we know the challenges. And we want peace. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Shalom is the greatest bracha. And when will this end? It just doesn't stop, seemingly. Now we know the Eibishter is protecting Yidden. We see open miracles with all the challenges and with all the losses and deaths, and we cannot minimize them. And the hostages that are still waiting, we're waiting for them to be released, uninjured and unscathed. And all these challenges, yet we see God protecting the Jewish people, surrounded by the 70 wolves, surrounded by the enemies, and especially Eretz Hashem Hashem Lekechabam B'Reish Hashanah V'Ad Achri Hashanah, a land that has special providence, Hashem watching over it all the time. But still, this is not what we're praying for. What we're praying for is a complete and permanent Shalom, true peace, with a Gula Amitis V'Ashlema. So the question is quite a powerful one. Ad Mosai, until when? How much more do we need to deal with this? Or will war in Israel ever end? So let's address that. I think it's a good place to begin. And with that, we'll also draw upon the time in which we end. Daf Leb mit der Zeit, Alter Rebbe says. Living with the time, which includes the parsha of the time, but also the tkufa, the period which we're in. As I mentioned, the end of month of Av, going into the month of El. What we learn from that regarding this situation today. Torah is a lesson, guidance, direction, instruction for our time and all the challenges of our time. Now this, of course, includes, I spoke about the big challenge, the collective one that's affecting all of Israel, affecting all the Jewish people, but it also includes all the personal challenges we have and all the difficulties we endure. And again, Ad Mosai, we want to have already peace, we want to have calm, we want to be able to say that we've done our work, thousands of years of Mesiras Nefesh, of hard work, we've paid our dues, and we paid heavy prices. We want to be able to say it's over. And we're marching into the Gula as the Rebbe promised us. Yet at the same time, we can ask that question, at the same time our focus always has to be, what are we going to do about it? We may not have answers to the why. We don't have answers to why. But what are we going to do about it? And that's ultimately where we get our strength and our direction and our fortitude to forge ahead. We are, at the end of the day, soldiers in an army. Soldiers in the military, both physically and spiritually. Tzivus Hashem, and our job, as the Rebbe explains in the Maimer Bossi Legani, the last Maimer that the Frierdiker Rebbe released, and the first Maimer the Rebbe delivered, and every year at Yud Shvat, renewing that connection. With Tzivas Hashem being such a central theme, we are foot soldiers, marching ahead with the Midas HaNetzachin, with the Bizbuz HaEtzes, given to us all the splurging of all the resources that the King reveals only in time of crisis. We have all these strengths. So for every challenge, we're given more strengths, as the Maimer explains. And ultimately with the goal of marching into the Gula Mitzvah Vashlem, the Deir Ashvi, the seventh generation, as the Rebbe says, that will be the end, the last generation in Golos, end of Golos, and the first generation into the Gula. And how do we gain that strength, especially, as I said, in this period of time? So let's discuss that now. So will war in Israel ever end? Look, the fact is, Rashi says in the beginning of Chumash already, that the Goyim will say, Listimatem, you're thieves. It's nothing new. That doesn't comfort us, but that fact is we should know that, yes, these things have been already spelled out. By the Bris Ben Absarim, Avram Avinu was told that his children will be in a land enslaved, in a land that's not theirs, but then they will go out, B'Rechush Gadol, will go out with great treasure. And all the empires have been predicted. The Dalet Goliath, the Babylonian Empire, Bavel, Modai, Paras Modai, Yovan, the Greek Empire, and of course Golis Edom and Golis Ishmael. The different explanations how that we sometimes count four, depending whether you're counting from the countries that were under the control of the Ishmaelim or under the control of Edom, the Western world. But the Frierdiker Rebbe already explains in his Pesach Maimer Tovshin Tes that the last birra will be the Golis Edom and Golis Ishmael. The Western world and the Muslim world, the Christian Western world, the Roman world, and the Muslim world. And that's what we're facing now. So it's not like something that's complete shock. It's still a shock because we thought it's all over. And we don't need any more. And we gone through after what we've gone through. So this is not a prediction that the war will never end until Moshiach comes. It's just telling us that these challenges are built into the whole structure. As soon as the Eibishter created Yaakov and Esav, and before that Yitzchak and Yishmael, and all these pitted against each other, these are cosmic alter egos, cosmic antithetical forces that are part of the world, just like we have the Nefesh Elikis and Nefesh Abamis in the microcosm. We have it also in the collective world. That's the real meaning behind the war. So it's a war that's more than just a technical one. There is a spiritual side to it. And we've discussed this at length. Again, this is not a comfort, this is not an explanation, this is not in any way to minimize it. It's just a matter to keep perspective. So how to react to the latest events in Northern Israel and Lebanon? Well, the reaction continues. Number one, strength. We have to show strength and negotiate only with strength. The enemy needs to see unequivocal commitment, fortitude, vigilance, and do everything possible to preempt and to eliminate the enemy. That's the way you gain peace. That's not for war. That's how you get the peace. Unconditional surrender. And all these negotiations, ceasefires, is a complete myth. I mean, I would call it a joke if it wasn't so tragic. Ceasefire. When someone attacks you and then they call for a ceasefire, that's not how it works. They attack you if they have to surrender, return all the hostages, and stop declaring war on you and calling for your annihilation. That's how you end a war. Total unconditional surrender, exactly as it happened during World War II with the Nazis and the Japanese. On the second end of things, there's the spiritual war. How do we react? We increase. Always, the Rebbe's message again and again, every war, 6-day war, the Yom Kippur war, everything in between, over and under, increasing in Torah mitzvahs, especially in the mitzvahs that have the zgula, that have the feature and the virtue of shmira, like mezuzah and tzedakah and tefillin, that protect and drive fear in the enemy. And in general unity, Ahavas Yisrael, Achdus Yisrael, Chinuch, Mipi Eli V'yenkim Yisad Ta'ez, L'hash B'Seivel U'Misnakim, educating especially children. We have a blueprint. We were told what to do when there's a time of war. There's always the both sides, the physical and the spiritual side of it. That's how we react. So yes, obviously we're all disturbed. You see yet another conflagration, and you say, well, how much? But at the end of the day, we have to increase even more. And the positive things we do, the more light we bring, the less darkness. And especially in the Schus of Eretz Yisrael, and with this military in Eretz Yisrael, what can we do? Exactly that. As we're coming from the 3 weeks and the 9 days, especially b'mishpat, Torah, halacha, mishnah, and tzedakah. That's how we redeem hostages. That's how we redeem all types of challenges. That's what we can do. Someone then asked the question, was today's war predicted by the prophets? So first let me just make this clear. If it was or wasn't, doesn't change anything we've said now. Does that help? Not necessarily, because as I said, we could have already been Yetzir. The Rebbe said a number of times, the Mittler Rebbe said, Lo yeh aid, we won't have any more Gzeres, and that we'll already be Yetzir Melchemes Gog and Magog, especially after World War II. So even if you can find that remez in the prophets, that's not necessarily a nachama, a comfort. We'd rather have been Yetzir already and finished. So is there somewhere in the prophets where it predicts these wars? There are many people saying the war with Hamas has been foretold by the prophets as the last big war immediately before Moshiach comes. I'm not trying to minimize the tragedy of October 7th. It is terrible, obviously. And we lost 1,200 people. But the Holocaust was much worse. We lost 6 million people. Shouldn't World War II be considered the big war before Moshiach comes? And if Moshiach didn't come then, why would the smaller war be the one to make him come? What's different between this war with Hamas? Well, first of all these comparisons, you don't compare tragedies, you don't compare wars. What happened, happened. World War II, we thought, yes, was the end of it all. But the fact of the matter remains, and the Rebbe brought the Yalkut Shmeini in Tov Shinun, that talks about an Arab king attacking a neighbor, Melech Porus rather, a Persian king attacking an Arab king, Kuwait at the time, and the world being frightened, what's going to happen, the Jews running, what will be, and the Eibishter said, don't be afraid, my children, everything I do for you, Higiyaz Mangul Ascha. So you see there are Medrash. Now, I'm quoting the Medrash because the Rebbe quoted the Medrash. Had it not happened, of course he wouldn't have quoted that Medrash, but once there is such a Medrash. And that's after World War II. And then you have the note that I've mentioned a number of times that the Rebbe wrote to Rabbi Greenglass in response to his question, the Zohar at the end of Parsha Ve'era, the Zohar at the end of Parsha Balak, the Piyut Yisrael Nesha, Kilo Soyer V'Chamosei. V'oid, as the Rebbe writes. Bottom line, predictions in Zohar and other places that talk about wars that will be fought at the end of time with that part of the world, the region, the Middle East, with the Arab-Muslim world creating trouble. B'achris hayomim, Masha Yasi Yishmol, b'achris hayomim, as the Reb Marash writes in the Maimer, Matzazu, Tafresh Mem. I've spoken about this in previous times. So we do have plenty of these statements. But our hope is always that we were Yetzir already. We've already had confrontations, both with Muslims and with Christians. And that's it. So if after the fact, you could say part of that birur. Whether World War II was bigger, that doesn't change that there still needs to be a birur. There's clearly a birur of Yishmael. As the Frierdiker Rebbe says in the Maimer I mentioned before, Tov Shin Tes, Pesach Mamorim, taken from the Pesach Mamorim of Tofrei Samaches. And I've written about this as well. If you go to meaningfullife.com, just to give you the full picture, I've written extensively about these different Mamorim and the periods when they were said and how they related to events that happened, that fall of the Ottoman Empire around those years, Tofrei Samaches, and then Tov Shin Tes, of course, was right after 1948. Here's not the place to go into. Bottom line is, yes, we do have these predictions in the Nevi'im, we have them in Maimar Chazal, in the Zohar, and so on. But at the end of the day, if you read all the predictions, the end it says that the Eden will prevail, a Moshiach will come. So two things we learn from this. Number one is that all this is a prelude to Moshiach. We don't know all the cheshbenis, as the Rambam says, the things we don't know we can't speculate about. But we have to see it as such. And second thing, we have to do what we can to bring that Moshiach, to bring Moshiach. Through Masenu v'Avodesenu, like I said earlier, all these challenges are meant to elicit from us more Avodah, more Torah and mitzvahs, more spreading of Torah and Chassidus, to illuminate the world. The teachings of Shev Mitzvahs Bnei Neach, the universal laws of morality and ethics, because if everyone followed that, we wouldn't have all these problems in the first place. So the Rebbe spoke about it for a good 10 years. I'm talking about, he talked about many more than 10 years, but especially in the Mems, from Tov Shem Mem till Tov Shem Nun approximately, with such intensity. What do you think the Rebbe was talking about? He's talking about how now is an opportune time to introduce these laws because they're the best preemptive way of avoiding the world becoming a jungle on all levels, including, of course, the atrocities we're seeing now. So someone else writes, is there somewhere in the prophets where it predicts that all these violent protests against Israel? Well, you can include that all part of this issue. And does it say what should we do about it? Yes, I just explained what we should do about it. And will it get worse before it gets better? No. We always hope it's going to get better. If it gets worse, that means that itself has to be transformed. But we always purport Tarachgut v'Zayngut that it should get better. And it's always a lesson to us to do to do more with what we're doing. If we're not doing it correctly, unfortunately, we can become our own worst enemy. So we need that unity, we need that vigilance, we need that fortitude, that absolute resolve. Okay. So now let's go, what does the transition from Of to El teach us today? I think it's pretty clear, especially what we've been speaking about the last few weeks. But let's preface that with another question. It's interesting, Taka. Av is the saddest month of the Jewish calendar. El is not the happiest month, like say Adar. Adar and Av are the two alter forces, as the Gemara says. Kashem she m'shenichnes Av mamayit b'simcha kach b'shenichnes Adar mamar b'simcha. But El is on Chedesh HaRachamim, a month of compassion, a month where finally Moshe begins to prevail over the Eibishter in the last 40 days from Rosh Chodesh El till Yom Kippur, and will succeed with Salachti Kidvarecha, forgiveness, with the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, 13 attributes of compassion. So in the month of Av, you could say it's not Yemei Rotzen, Yemei Kas, as Rashi and the Medrashim bring, because he wasn't successful in gaining God's forgiveness. But why this contrast, right from Av to El? It would seem you want to have a little buffer between the saddest month to a month of Rachamim, compassion, Ani Livdei V'Dei Li, my beloved to me. Melech Besada, the king in the field, the example Alter Rebbe gives for why the Yud Gimel Midas Harachim are revealed in El, even though it's weekdays. The king is with us in our mundane lives. But that exactly is the answer. It's not going from sadness. The true meaning, kavaneh, of Chodesh Av, like the Medrash in Yalkut says that the Rebbe brings, that the destruction of Aryeh, of the Beis Hamikdash, by Aryeh, by Nebuchadnezzar, in the month of Aryeh, the mazel of Aryeh of, is Almanas. Almanas. In it is really Seis Almanas Livnes. Within it is built already the construction. Sheyove Aryeh, that the Eibishter will come, who's called Aryeh, Aryeh Shog Mila Yira, and will rebuild the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi called Aryeh in the month of Aryeh. And Aryeh's Rosh Hashanah says the Shalah brings from the Kadmenim. Chassidus cites it, that Tzemach Tzedek cites it, the Rebbe brings it. Rosh Hashanah El, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Yeshayin Rabbis. So from Aryeh itself, like we say, Geula builds Geula. Geula is from the very letters of Geula. It's not two separate things, which makes it a whole different story. It's not just, okay, we had sadness, it's over, now let's go into happiness. The whole sadness, you didn't say the Aliyah, it's all part of the Aliyah. So Av leads right into El. Av feeds into El. So in that sense, even Moshe, even the days when Moshe is on the mountain and he's not successful, so to speak, it's still stepping stones. Because had he not been up there those 40 days, from Yud Zayin, from Shivasa B'Tammuz, Yud Zayin Tammuz till Rosh Chodesh El, then he would not have been able to accomplish what he accomplished at Chodesh Elul till Yom Kippur. And the way you could say even the Shviras Haluchas. That's why the Eibusha said, Yeshakeicha Sheshivarta, that even I thank you for breaking them, because the breaking of the Luchas actually brought something greater. So the Chatchila, obviously, we didn't want all of that. Should be no chet ha'egel, no sin of the golden calf, and no breaking of the tablets. But after the fact, you needed Tzedek Aliyah, that the Shvira brings even a deeper, the second Luchas, and all the milas that Yom Kippur has. Transformation, not just Yehovcha Yom Mel L'Sasan L'Simcha L'Meidim Tev. So this period in time is teaching us that when we're facing challenges, when we're facing wars, and yet another attack and another threat, it just teaches even more importantly to remember. It's reminding us right here, the end of Of. Of is leading to Elul. And Ov's full name is Menachem Of, not just Of, Menachem, the comforting. And indeed, after the 3 weeks of Tlosa de Paranissa, the 3 weeks of affliction and oppression and distress, Bein HaMtzodim, between the dire straits of Bein HaMtzodim, what does it lead to? Shiva de Nechemte. 7, the full cycle of 7 of Nechama, of comfort. Comfort of what? Like Rabbi Akiva, who they said, Akiva Nechamtani, because he saw in the destruction, he was able to see the rebuilding. And that's what we're leading to. So, again, we're not asking for any of the negative, but if it comes our way, we have to know how to look at it with the right perspective, with the eyes of Rabbi Akiva, the pnimius of it. And we have to act on it. And realize as we go from Chamisha Asar B'Av, the full moon, as we discussed last week, that leads us into the month of Elul, the month of Tshuva, and the increase in all Kavim of Aved, and Torah, Aved, Gmilas Chasadim, Tshuva, Geula, the 5 Rosh Tevis and Elul, as the Rebbe explains. So that's what we learn from this transition. So this brings us to the next question. How do we bring light and truth into a world full of lies? And this lesson from Av to El teaches us how. Because you look around the world, it's very depressing. If someone asks, how do we overcome the appalling lies being propagated today? How can we not be disheartened and depressed by it all? To read it more in specific detail, let me read it this way. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, in one of Bob Dylan's songs, he sings this great line, all the truth in the world adds up to one big lie. I would just add, we don't need Bob Dylan. The Chassidim already, Lahavdil, I don't know, Lahavdil is Juju. Maybe he took it from there. The Chassidim already said it's Alma de Shikra. Rab Geshem Ber Paharer, great-grandfather of my own. When they asked him what is he looking forward to when he moves to the next world, he said, one that no longer will lie. There will no longer be lies. Shkorim. So yes, it's one big lie. So this guy continues to write, I think this really sums up our current era. There's such blatant lies that are being believed by smart, educated people because they are so blinded and consumed with hatred, and specifically hatred of Israel, the Jews, and Donald Trump. It's come to a point where if Muslim terrorists attack a college campus pro-Palestinian rally and kill many anti-Israeli protesters, the apologists would try to say it wasn't really Muslim terrorists, it was Mossad agents who did it to make Muslims look bad. And after the FBI shows evidence that the perpetrators were actually Palestinians, the apologists will say, see how bad the Israelis oppressed the Palestinians. Israel is so bad that the Palestinians had to resort to attacking Columbia University and killing students in order to get their freedom and statehood. Rahman al-Islam. This is not the same world I was born into 4 decades ago. When even though there was evil in the world, at least there was a clear line and clear definition of good and evil, and a clear definition of who is good and who is evil. I think I know the difference between good and evil, but it's disenfranchising to be surrounded by people who don't know the difference. If I went to a park to relax, and a large group of people started exhibiting violent, threatening behavior, I would walk away and go home. But how do we walk away from the entire planet that has been poisoned with lies? What is the best advice you can give some of us that are so disheartened due to all the lies and political chaos, in order that we don't feel depressed and despondent, and we have the strength and fortitude to carry on with our mission of revealing godliness in the world? Thank you, Amen. Mashiach, come before you finish reading this letter. Amen. So you're echoing the feelings that many people have, and it could be quite, especially you watch the news. So firstly, I always encourage people, maybe you should minimize watching the whole voyeurism that doesn't add anything. As the Rebbe would say, well, who does it help when you know what's going on out there? Besides the fact that the media itself is filled with lies and distortions. So that's in general. But on the positive note, a Jewish person, especially a chassid of the Rebbe, we were taught something. You're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. With all that's going on, what do we learn from the Rebbe? The Rebbe lived in the world. Firstly, he was born in Tsarist Russia, with all its tsaras. He saw the rise of communism, then saw the rise of Nazism, saw its effects that affected him personally and family. Reb Levi Yitzchak were coming from his 80th Yahrzeit, his Elul yesterday. He saw his father, experienced his father, all the tsaras he went through, the Yisurim, the being arrested, being separated from him. And yet with all that, and all the negativity, and all the assimilation, and all the other challenges that the Rebbe faced, like the Frierdiker Rebbe before him, was unwavering in the commitment to good, and to light, and to Torah mitzvahs. None of that fazed him. That doesn't mean he wasn't hurt, of course. Talking about the Rebbe feeling the pain of others, the worst possible way. The Rebbe writes in a letter, I'm a Holocaust survivor. I lost my brother, my grandmother, other family members, my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law. Besides, of course, feeling for and seeing it with his own eyes. And yet, how did the Rebbe translate? How did he harness that anguish? And it was tremendous anguish. How did he harness that pain and that grief? Was to building a better world. There's really no other option. It's what Jews always did. The Pasuk says it explicitly. As they were afflicted, as they were oppressed, in direct proportion to that, they thrived and flourished and blossomed. This has been the story of our history. No other nation did it that way. Not just we survived, we thrived. So when you see all these lies, maybe worse than ever, I'm not going to get into that. There's only one response, one healthy response. The more lies, the more truth we need to bring into the world. The more incumbent is it upon us to do something. If it wasn't so bad, as you described, then okay, you could say I'm being more complacent. If anything, this teaches us that we have to be even more vigilant. That is the only response. I've never found another one or a better one. And more than that, we've seen success. It's not like, okay, we've tried so many times. We're here today to talk about it. Have we suffered? We've suffered greatly, but we're here. With all the Holocaust, we survived. With tremendous losses, tremendous pain, tremendous toll that it took upon us. And there are tremendously beautiful things that you can point to, besides our families and the blessings we have. Eretz Yisrael, the Moses Chinuch. They could all always grow. But there's tremendous blessings. And that's how we have to look at it. So yes, Rab Gershom Ber Paharer, when he said he looks forward to a world of emes, that's after the Aveda. But we live in this world, Hayem La'seisam, and in this world, we have to bring tremendous amount of light. I can tell you my own work, on a personal note. Ever since the war began, we call October 7th. And for that matter, the wars that have fought before that, different levels. To me, because I was trained by the best, I've only doubled and tripled. And I want to thank my team for that and everyone who's been involved, our efforts. Because that's the way we're trained. That's how we are. The challenge is stronger, so we have to come out punching even more. When I say punching, I mean with the spiritual fortitude and spiritual resources, the spiritual weapons of clarity, direction, guidance, commitment, actions, more mitzvahs, both for the Jewish world and for the non-Jewish world. And thank God, relatively speaking, we're not finished. Slava Gula to bring. But there are many people doing positive things. And the more we increase in that, that's how we prevail. The other option of either just ignoring it all and escaping into your own little world, or just being bitter and angry and overwhelmed and complaining and pointing fingers, as you can imagine, I don't want to even go into negating that option. It's just not an option. That's our approach. So with that, I want to go into a whole bunch of other questions regarding this section. How do we bring light and truth into a world full of lies? So how do we bring truth to such a dark world? Number one, we have to get more committed to it. Learn more Torah, more Chassidus, understand the matzav in Eretz Yisrael, understand so you can communicate well with people. And whoever you can, try to dispel the lies that they have. Some people are brainwashed, you won't be able to get very far, but there are many people who are not. But you cannot afford to be uninformed. You need to be able to speak. I've been to certain events, and yes, I've had effect on people. Not on everyone. My videos that I do on YouTube reach a lot of Muslims, have a real impact on people. And I'm not here to talk about myself. My point is, we have to be on the offense. The best defense is offense. That's how you bring truth to a dark world. So number one is be informed, bring truth to yourself, bring light into your life. The more you learn Torah, the more you learn Chassidus, the more it illuminates the clarity. And I'm not literally teaching now in Ayin Beis in volume 3, talking about the clarity of Chachmei law of Torah. Bohir, he calls it. Chachma Brura, he says, Emes, B'tarosa, pure truth. The more you see darkness, the more you need that. Because the only place to turn to counter things that are negative. Where do you expose lies? You can't expose lies with other lies. You have to expose lies with truth. Just like darkness is dispelled by light. And that's what Taka says in the Pasuk. Chachma from Sichlus, truth, wisdom from folly, is like light dispelling darkness. Alter Rebbe cites this, of course, in chapter 12 in Tanya. So with that, someone asks a question. Can light automatically dispel the darkness of a black hole, for example? There's a teaching in Chassidus, this person writes, that the moment you turn on a light in a dark room, the darkness immediately disappears. Yeah, I just read. Ma'at er decha harbe cheshach, the Alter Rebbe brings in Perek Yud Beis, other places it's cited. And we see physically. Fire and water are two adversarial forces. Enough fire can evaporate large body of water. Enough water can extinguish a great fire. But light and darkness is like darkness is simply the absence of light. And the proof is you go into a dark room, as dark it is, you bring a little candle. Right in that area, the light automatically, without any battle, it's not fire and water, automatically dispels darkness. If it's a very dark room, a large room, you need a lot more light. But light naturally dispels darkness, which is critical in Tanya because he wants to explain how Moyach Shal Talav is a natural thing, not acquired. Natural self-control. So the question this person is asking, but how then would that teaching work in a black hole which has such dense gravity that it can absorb light and the black hole's darkness doesn't disappear? Does Chassidus have any teachings about what a black hole is spiritually and what powers our soul has to defeat its darkness? Very good question and very relevant. Because indeed, the Chassidus talks about there's also another opinion. Vayomash cheshech. That darkness is not just the absence of light. The cheshech has its own substance. It seems b'fnei not just heder ha'or. There's a fascinating ha'ora in the Rebbe, from the Rebbe in Tovshin Ches, in Maimorim. The Rebbe brings both opinions. And basically saying both two dargas in cheshech. So the first darga in cheshech, that's heder ha'or, makes sense. You bring in light, automatically the darkness is dispelled. What about darkness that has its own substance? What about people today in the world that are lying, not just a lie because there's no truth, so the liar dominates. But where a lie has a substance of its own, where it will lie even in the face of truth. With example, a black hole is not a negative thing, it's part of God's creation, but a black hole is not just the absence of light. its power, its gravitational pull is so powerful it doesn't let light escape. How do you deal with that? So there's a story with a chassid. The Rebbe brings a story in the early years. Some tzaddik was saying on MyLife Chassidus, the room was packed. A chassid came in. I don't know if you remember the name of the chassid. And he had nowhere to stand because it was so packed. The only place he could stand was between the lamp and the Rebbe. But he was concerned because if he stood there, he would cast a shadow on the Rebbe. But he said, you know what, Mesidus Nefesh Chassidus, he wants to hear the Maimer, and he stood there. And in the middle of the Maimer, the Tzemach Tzedek says, "We can Meile sein amitzias, but we can nicht Meile sein heder ha'er." You can elevate something that exists, you can transform it, but you can't transform something that is not existent. A shadow is the absence of light. How do you elevate that? So clearly that story is going according, which of course he was referring to the shadow that this chassid, actually I should have added, the chassid felt, not just that he didn't mind, that the Rebbe will elevate his shadow. That's, I missed the main line. That the Rebbe will elevate. So the Rebbe says in the Maimer, "Amekenisht Meile zayin." That's clearly according to the opinion that Cheshech is heder ha'er. That you can't be Meile. But Cheshech, that's a Metzias, you can be Meile because it's a Metzias. But what do we know from this? There's taka two levels. Heder ha'er is one. And their taka, it's easier in a way, just bring light in. You're not Meile of the Cheshech, you eliminate it because it dispels it. But when there's more darkness, that to the point that it has substance, then obviously the light that you're bringing has to be a lot stronger. Because now you're dealing with your hafchu, you want to transform it. So I would say the lesson from a black hole is that even when darkness has substance, then we need a different type of Aveda. It's not just enough to shine light, then automatically the darkness dispels. Like someone's lying, tell the truth, automatically there's no more lie, because here's a witness that tells the truth. But let's say the other person is deliberately lying, and he argues with the witness, like Edim Zemimim, who lie. So there you need a different type of Aveda, the Aveda of a real Ishapche. Like Zdenis Nasale Kazachis. Not only Zdenis, you eliminate the crimes, but you have to transform them. Transformation requires much deeper Aveda, and there too you can create a transformation. Which leads me to the next note that someone sent, an interesting note, which fits right into this actually. Someone writes like this: this week, on August 19th, was the anniversary of the riots, referring to the riots, 33 years from the riots in Crown Heights, when unfortunately Yankel Rosenbaum was murdered in cold blood. Tov Nun Aleph, the summer of 91. So I can never forget the pogrom that the racist monster Al Sharpton did to us. So he was one of the black instigators. But shockingly, I saw Sharpton in the television news recently defending Israel's right to self-defense and saying that what Hamas did was wrong and that the Palestinians can never achieve peace and their own state through terrorism. Wow, if such a monster like Sharpton can finally come around, maybe there's hope that more of our enemies will realize we are not the bad guys. All we want to do is live in peace and follow the Torah and bring more love and light in the world by revealing Hashem's presence in the world. I still don't forgive Sharpton for what he did in the past, but I'm simultaneously impressed that he's now speaking the truth. On Sunday's show, he's referring to last week's Sunday show, Rabbi Jacobson commented that just like Christianity was our enemy for many years and they inspired pogroms and expulsions against us, I would say more than inspired, they perpetrated. But after years of enlightenment, dialogue, and education, they softened their hatred, and now we peacefully coexist with them. And I would add, not just they softened, through our Aveda, it transformed the world and refined them. I mentioned the United States of America, as the Rebbe says, Amalchus Shel Chesed. And hopefully with an increase of acts of kindness and education, we can also peacefully coexist with Muslims. Part of the proof is, if Sharpton can lighten up his hate speech, so can anyone else. Okay, look, I can't speak about Sharpton. I don't know what he is and what he's then and what he's now. Is it political? But bottom line is, as a lesson for us, absolutely. Here you see an example. The Christians, for many years, terrorized Jews in the worst possible way. It wasn't just a cheshech, heder ha'er. It was an active force of evil, of ra. Cheshech as a metzias. And yet they were transformed. And there you could take it transformed. That's the Maila. When it's only Hedera, as the Tzemach Tzedek said, you can't transform it, you can only eliminate it by bringing light in. But to transform requires, however, a lot more work. And indeed, we absolutely believe, going back to the Birur of Esav and the Birur of Yishmael, the end of days, that we will transform the whole world. And the Muslim world, including the fundamentalists and all that, will be transformed. We have to still fight our wars and not be naive and be very prudent about it all. But we know for sure we will prevail. And even Yaakov, when he told Esav, "Visnala li'iti," you go ahead. And he said, he says, come live side by side. So Rashi explains, Yaakov was not lying, he was saying the truth. He was saying that ultimately I will come. And there'll be the transformation with the Gula Amitis Vashlema. Okay. Someone asks a question. What are ways to find faith, healing, and strength? Question goes like this. Let's see here. As a 26-year-old dealing with chronic health issues, I'm looking for ways to find strength, comfort, and meaning in my life. Are there any specific Jewish teachings or perspectives on illness, healing, and faith that you believe could be particularly meaningful or empowering for someone in my situation? I'm open to learning more about how my religious tradition views these topics. So I believe I answered this question indirectly in what we've talked about till now, because both on a global level and on a personal level is the same idea. It's connecting, when you learn Shara B'Tochen, for example, from Cheves HaLevavos, it's connecting to trust and faith in God. And gaining strength that if God put you in this world, He gave you all the strength you need to face all your challenges. It's connecting through positive acts of kindness, of goodness, of different mitzvahs. All of that brings healing. I'm talking about, in addition, of course, to the obvious, to go to the right doctors and so on. But you're asking the question about how to deal with things like that. That's how we deal with it. We strengthen our souls. We strengthen our devotion. We strengthen our faith and our trust and our commitment to good deeds, to mitzvot. And that strengthens our health. So since we're already talking about lying and truths and so on, someone asked the question, can we lie to protect ourselves? The question was posed like this. Tanakh teaches that King David pretended he was mentally ill when he was captured by the Philistines, and they let him go thinking he was just mentally disturbed and not realizing he was the king. Can we also lie when the situation benefits us? For example, if we're driving to work and the roads are blocked by Hamas supporter protesters, can we open our car windows and yell out from the river to the sea, "Free Palestine," so they think we're on their side and they let our car through? Or if we do this, we are causing harm to Israel? Okay, look, it's case by case. I would avoid making such statements for many reasons. But, pekuach nefesh. If you're in a situation of true danger, then you have to do what you do. We're not talking about Avodah Zarah now, or Gilei Arayos, or Shfichas Damim. You protect yourself. But in general, I would stay away from making statements like that, whether you're allowed to lie. If it's Pekuach Nefesh, you do whatever it takes to save yourself. That's the fact. That's Pekuach Nefesh, including Midvar Sheker Tirchak, that you avoid lying. But to lie about something like, say you're pro-Hamas, I find that not just distasteful, I don't know, something wrong with it, rubs me the wrong way, since you're posing it that way. So I would avoid doing that. There's no choice. The point being is that Pekuach Nefesh is the key thing that you're really addressing. Okay. Which is a unique situation. with that said, still another question or two. How can people so blatantly lie about the Jews stealing Israel from the Arabs? Why is much of the world telling a lie that the Jews stole the land from the Palestinians when the Bible says clearly that they stole the land from the Canaanites? Well, first of all, Rashi says we didn't steal anything. The question goes back almost 1,000 years ago, Rashi, where it says, Listimatem, they'll claim that you stole the land, and Hashem says, Nachlas Goyim, Losas Lehem Nachlas Goyim, Keyach Maisav Higid La'ame. That's why the Torah begins with Bereshis Bara Lakim, not with HaChedesh Hazel Lachem, even though the Torah is to give us mitzvahs, to tell us, Keyach Maisav Higid La'ame. He told his nation, he related to them the power of his Maisim, that I created the world. And I give the world to whomever I want to. I gave it to the nations, and I took from them a piece and gave it to the Eden. So first of all, you see the lie of Listimatem going back all the way then. Is it a lie? In their mind, maybe in their distorted mind, they think they have ownership. But we have an answer. God created the world. It's not your earth. And if anything, you were given plenty of land elsewhere. Now, today we have other things. It's not just Bereshis Bara Lakim, because everybody can read the Torah and see who the land was promised to, including Muslims and Christians can read that. The problem is today we have deliberate lies, distortion of whole history. That requires a whole other series. So how could that be possible? Because we live in a world where there's a big tzimtzum arishin, God concealed his presence, people want to make a mistake, and there are people who make deliberate mistakes. And they have their agendas, and whatever that is. Some of them are terrible agendas, and we just have to fight it like we've been talking about till here. Okay. Since we're talking about this topic, so another question that's related, what is the difference between faith and imagination? So someone asked a question like this. Interesting question. Hi, Rabbi. I hope you're doing well. Over Shabbos, I had an in-depth discussion with a friend, and I wanted to get your perspective on it. Our conversation revolved around the relationship between belief and imagination. As part of the human psyche, we tend to imagine things, whether in dreams or throughout the day, that don't always manifest into reality. Imagination often remains just that, imagination. But with belief, particularly in Hashem, it's something we're meant to make a reality. We work to believe that everything Hashem does is for the good, building our connection with Hashem. This year, coming out of Tisha B'Av, the experience hit me harder than in previous years. I truly believed that Moshiach would come on that day. It felt real to me. But when it didn't happen, it left me questioning. Sometimes I struggle with the feeling that Yiddishkeit is just an imagination. And it's difficult to hold on to belief when it doesn't translate into reality. For example, when we read a book, we use our imagination to bring the story to life. Similarly, when we learn about creation in Sefer Bereshis, it's easy to believe in Hashem's role because we can see the world He created. But when it comes to Moshiach or other concepts that haven't materialized yet, I find it hard to turn my imagination into genuine belief. How can I bridge that gap? How can I take my imagination and transform it into a deeper belief, into deep belief, especially in the context of trusting that everything Hashem does is for the good and the coming of Moshiach? Very good, excellent. So that's absolutely the case. I remember once in a Fabrengen, it was a weekday Fabrengen in the Mems, the Rebbe said that the truth is that people who are born in Golus cannot really imagine Geula. Those that were born in the time of the Baal Ha'hilula, and then they saw how the second temple was destroyed, Rahman al-Islam. So they know what it was like in the time of the Baal Ha'hilula, and now they see the contrast. But someone born in Golus is like someone born in darkness. That's his natural state. The Rebbe explained, I believe, that's why Moshiach is Baba Chadas. Moshiach doesn't come easily for us through a concerted awareness. It will come as a surprise for everyone, because we're used to this world. Now, obviously, our neshama that's geuladik sees it differently. That is why the Rebbe said that in order for us to prepare ourselves and the world to Moshiach, Kabbalah's Pnei Mashiach, he said one of the things was Lilmed in Yonagula Mashiach. And he said clearly, not to learn it as a zgula. Sometimes you learn something, it's a zgula. When you learn this, God will reward you with that. That no, because everything comes from Torah, like Kol Esig B'Torah Se'el, you learn about Mashiach. You learn about Beis HaMikdash. So that's Ke'ilu, it's considered as if you're building it. Because you're envisioning your state of mind, your consciousness, and your psyche is becoming aligned with Geula Dika world. Even though we're not living in Geula yet, and we're still Golus mentality, but you're starting to envision, what would the Geula look like if Mashiach came right now? What would your street look like? What would the trees look like? What would the world look like? What would your home look like? What would your children look like? When you speak that way, what you're doing is taking an imagination that could be a very abstract concept, a dream, like the Rebbe says, a cholam, but it's a good cholam. But you're making it into a tangible reality, into a viable picture. And once you see it's possible. We look at the world today, where the Rebbe said, Effen de Eigen. What did he mean by opening the eyes? Our eyes are open. You see the advancements in technology. You see the unity that technology has created. The advancements in political freedoms, in religious freedoms, in so many different ways. So you start saying, it's possible. 500 years ago, during the Holocaust, it would be very hard to imagine how the world is suddenly going to have Moshiach without a miracle. Definitely hundreds of years ago. But now, people respect charity, humanitarian efforts. We're still not out of the woods. We've got work to be done. But there are elements that you could open your eyes and look and say, wow, this is a miracle. Our grandparents would think this is like Mashiach's times because Shmuel said, the Gemara, Ein ben elam hazal mesa Mashiach el shibud malchus bulvad. The only difference between Mashiach and now is shibud malchus, being servitude to the nations. So someone told me, yes, well, we pay parking tickets, alternate side street parking, or taxes. That's not the shibud malchus that our grandparents suffered from. The point being is there are many things in the world that you start envisioning and imagination becomes a reality. If you can dream it, it can happen. And the more we learn Torah, the more we learn Chassidus, the famous story that Tzemach Tzedek said, Tzalib da'aha. Why does he talk about Geula Mashiach? Tzalib da'aha. And he explained, what does that mean? You're listening to a conversation behind the wall. You hear every fifth word. So you can't really make out what they're talking about. Then they come out of the room and they tell you what they're talking about. You say, aha, now I understand that word. I'm a Redveg Mashiach now, says the Tzemach Tzedek. So maybe you don't understand it all, but when Mashiach comes, you'll say, it's not a new thing. It's not, I never heard about it. I heard about it. I learned Chassidus. Gilei Elokuz Be'elam Hazeh Agashmi, says the Alter Rebbe in Perek Lamed Zayin in the beginning. That's Mashiach. I learned about Gilei Elokuz. Did I experience it behergish? Maybe not completely. But I learned about it. Elokuz Bepshitas, I know the concept. Ein Eid Milvadei. Hayehu Shmei V'chod. And so on. I learned about before the Tzimtzum. So we learned about concepts like this, and the more we understand them, the more we relate to them, the more they become, instead of an abstract imagination, a real amunah. So even amunah can be something completely beyond, or amunah could be something that we can relate to, could talk about it. That's how I would phrase it all and explain that question. Okay. Now let's go over to Parsha A. Since it's also this week is Parsha A, let's quickly talk about Parsha A. He says like this. So what's the lesson in general from the A is exactly what we just said. The A means Zen. The A anochi nesen lefnechem ayem esar bracha, and the opposite. The A explains the Rebbe. The A is more than Shema. Shema Yisrael, you listen. So Shema is havana v'asogeh. You understand it. Someone's telling you the story, and it could resonate. But when you see something, ain't a demishmiya l'riyah. When you see something, there's a certain resonating truth that only comes from sight. Ein eid nasa dayan. A witness cannot be a judge because once you see it, it changes. It's not just listening to it, even from a persuasive and an honest witness. So the A means to see Elokus, as much as we can possibly see. And we can see it in our actions. When a person behaves in a way, and Masenu v'avedesenu, Or like we spoke about Shabbos Chazain, the Beis HaMikdash is shown to every year in order to be me'ered at Gaguim, a yearning, to straighten out their ways so we can be zeichet to the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi. So the Rebbe says, so you see the Beis HaMikdash, not through the Beis HaMikdash physically, but through the actions that it's caused you to be. So when a person today says, I'm passionate about Moshiach and Gula because I heard about it from the Rebbe, and I learned in Torah, and time is now, and I've increased because it's urgent, it's a sense of urgency. It's almost now, almost here. That you see with your eyes. When you envision Moshiach, even if you don't see it physically, but you can envision with the Einei HaSeichel, with your mind, with the eye in the mind. Chacham Einav Bereishei. A wise person, his eyes are in his head, he sees with his eyes. Like the Rebbe once said to someone, some people sleep by Fabring with their eyes closed, and most with their eyes open. You can have your eyes open and not see. Einenu lehem v'lo yiru. They have eyes but they don't see. So when you open the eyes of the mind, that creates a. And the bracha, the Rebbe asked the question, Neisen means kol ha-neisen b'ayin yofer neisen. That's a matana. How do you say neisen and bracha? Fine. What's the bracha of the opposite of neisen? I'm sorry, the opposite of bracha. It says the opposite, klola. Why is that a matana? So the Rebbe explains, because that's also a matana. To know what path to go on is a blessing, and to know what path not to go on is a blessing. Not the blessing is the negative, is the curse. It's to tell you this is not the path to go on. That could be equally and sometimes even a stronger blessing, to be told that. Which leads us to two questions that were asked. What is the deeper meaning of the ceremony that took place on Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal? Har Gerizim and Har Ebal. When the groups assembled up there were saying the blessings and the opposite of blessings. What exactly was the ceremony? What is the deeper meaning behind it all? So briefly, there's a whole sugi in Gemara and Seit about it. And the psukim in this parsha, there's later more about it later in Dvarim, Sefer Dvarim, later in Yeshua, is essentially reflects, as the Gemara and Seit says, it reflects two approaches to life. And what the Eibusher is saying that this ceremony is to reflect the responsibility that we all have for each other. And responsibility goes both ways. A parent doesn't just educate a child what to do. You also teach a child what not to do. And it's equally important. Because you can know what to do, but you could also, unfortunately, go down the wrong path and also do something wrong. So you don't just teach someone, here's the healthy food to eat, you also teach them this is not healthy to eat. This is not healthy behavior. So what the Torah is telling us, the ceremony was about establishing the rules, the paths of life. That here's the path. The Har Gerizim is the mountain of blessing. It was a fertile mountain, it says in Chazal. Har Ebal was a mountain with rocks, a hard mountain. The mountain that represents the negative. And both are necessary, both are the blessing. And that's the lesson to us all. That's why Asay Tev and Surmera, what to do and what not to do. We're coming to Cheder Shel. So we have things that we have to be doing, there are things we have to avoid doing. Second question, why must an idolatrous city be destroyed? And does that apply today? Someone asked the question. Talking about different cities where there is idolatry. Well, the simple answer is because the idea of idolatry is considered to be the source of all evil. It's not just whether you're worshiping a piece of wood or a stone and so on. It's antithetical to God because it means you're not serving a God that's greater than you are. You're serving a God on your terms. As the Rambam explains, all these Avodah Zarahs they were trying to find a God they can relate to. They could see, they can tangibly relate to in some way. The whole point is to have the bittul to something beyond you, which also explains why it's such a big sin. God really cares. People want to be foolish. He's jealous of a false god, a piece of stone. People are being not childish. No, because that means you're and the whole point is to worship a God that created you in the divine image, not to create a God that's in your image. That's what essentially idolatry is. So the destruction of idolatrous city was destructing things that were antithetical to God. They would lead to everything else, including murder and other sins and transgressions. Obviously, if they did tshuva, the Rambam says, then that's good. There's machlekes between the Rambam and the Ravid, or the Kesef Mishnah, and others that comment on it already. So tshuva always helps, even if there was warning, as the Kesef Mishnah explains in the halachas around this topic. Okay. So the last little while that we have here in this program, I wanted to just talk about a few things. Let's see what we have time to talk about here. Let me talk about Chafov. Last week, because of time limitations, which I should have spoken about, yesterday was Chafov, but not just Chafov, it's 80 years, Tavshin Dalet, Tavshin Pei Dalet, from the Elul, the Istalkus of the Reb Levi Yitzchak, the Rebbe's father. We know how much the Rebbe, of course, Misad Kibbutz, but beyond that, said it's just chus and merit to encourage that we should all learn the Rebbe Levi's Torah. But I want to say one thing about Reb Levi Yitzchak that we can learn from. What can we learn from him about our times, from Reb Levi Yitzchak? The thing that jumps out most, of course, is that besides the fact, of course, he was a tremendous Gaon, a Makubal, Ben Achaben from the Tzemach Tzedek, and all his yichus and all of that, and that itself is tremendous, is the Baal Ha'hilula Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh, the Yisurim. He was arrested, persecuted, the worst possible way, and ultimately exiled to Tzili and Almata, where he's interred. Yet you see one thing. Talk about an example for what we've been discussing when there's challenging times. How did he look at his Yisurim? And this is not speculation. We have a Reshima. It's worthwhile reading and learning. A Reshima that he wrote, where he describes in detail the years, the locations, the different prisons he was at, how long he was there, their names. It connects it all to his name, Levi Yitzchak, which is all about Gvura. Levi is Gvura and Yitzchak is Gvura. Basically a life of challenges. But he basically sees Gvura of Atzilus, which ultimately evolves or devolves into the Gvura of when the Yisrael Yisrael, a life, a difficult life. He sees a lakus in it. Similar to when we say, Hein Gvuresav, these are God's Gvuras. And you could see it from the Reshima. This is so telling, because it tells you about a person, Surim. You think, forget about no tightness on the Eibishter. That we understand, is a tzaddik. But furthermore, he could be oblivious of it, ignore it, override it. He's busy with doing other things, writing Torah. No, he takes the very Golos and the years that he spent in these Golos and connects it all, finds Kedusha in there, Elokus in it. Not that was their intention. Similar when we hear that the Frierdiker Rebbe, when he was asked, you know where you are when he was imprisoned? So he says, yeah, I'm in a place that's pater from a mezuzah, like a stable. And what he was meaning to do, the Rebbe says, he was being mamshech elokus in a place you couldn't put a mezuzah. But that's also halacha. That's also hamshach of elokus. So this is Reb Levi Yitzchak. So capturing kol shkem v'kal v'chem, what we're going through, which is not even comparable, to see elokus in everything. And ultimately, that must have given him some, I don't say redeeming, something. And that's what he left us with. You read it. It's again, a person going through Yisurim. We're not talking about he's sitting and writing about it from a distance. He's in the abyss, and that's what he saw. So that's a tremendous lesson, 80 years later, to our lives, how we look at everything in life, and we see we see the Elul. In the Arya, you see El Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Hishayin Rab. And a final note, let's see here. Let me read one final question, which was, I was going to... It's a comment from a reader who's asking a question, so it's more of a housekeeping thing, but let's conclude that. Does Rabbi Jacobson use a different Hebrew dialectic It sounds different than the dialectic we study in class. Would it be possible to have a subtitle of the transliteration of the Hebrew words used in the podcast so we can look for the meaning and translate them, and thank you for that. Well, there are different dialectics. I speak mostly the one I grew up with, which is more of what we call a Litvish, but it's Russian Chabad-style expressions. There's a Sephardic dialectic, and there's others as well. And I hope I try to explain myself, especially translating into English. So we will try our best to transliterate wherever we can, but I appreciate your care, and I hope that just clarifies that. On a closing note, there's some other questions I wanted to address, but we're simply out of time, so I'll continue that next week. Some very interesting questions also I really wanted to get there, but okay, it's life. Since we're going into Chodesh Elul, Ani l'dei dividei dili, and we're at the end of so it's already custom to start benching people ksiv v'chsimateva. Some people do that already from Chamish Asar B'Av, which is gematria ksiv v'chsimateva. Should be a very healthy year, and yes, we should transform all challenges, personal and global and communal, into a Chodesh HaRachamim, of total compassion. That should be a year that from Tavshin Pei Dal we go to Tavshin Pei Hey, a year there'll be of produce is pay. I'm sure there'll be all kinds of Rosh Hashanah, produce Hashalom, or however you want to interpret it, into the Gula Amitis Vashlema. And we have the schus because we're living in this generation, and we stand as midgets on the shoulders of giants before us to carry and continue and cross the finish line, carry the baton into the Gula Amitis Vashlema, and we should be zeichet to see that here, ready at the end of the month of Av, Yehavch Yom Meil L'Sasan L'Simcha L'Moedim Tevim, and especially in Eretz Yisrael and everywhere in the world, Yidden and the general world should be protected from all negative things, and there'd be a total transformation, not just elimination, transformation of the world into the Gula Amitis Vashlema. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Kol Tuv and a good Chodesh Elul.
This program is brought to you by MyLife Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.